I have you as John, is that okay?
Yes.
Okay. Do you, John McAdams, solemnly swear that you will support the Constitution and will obey the laws of the United States and the state of Maine, and you will, in all respects, observe the provisions of the Charter, the ordinances of the City of Sanford, and statutes of the state of Maine, and will faithfully discharge the duties of the member of the Charter Review Committee for the City of Sanford?
I do.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, next on the agenda is election of officers. I saw that I was chairperson at the, at the meeting, so as that, then we do need to elect a vice chair and a secretary. And this is an informal meeting, so do we have any volunteers for vice chair, which would really just take place if I was unable to make a meeting, I believe?
Easy. Huh? Sure. It doesn't matter.
I had actually thought so as well. I did. Okay. I saw that on the sheet. Oh, I remember. Okay.
If you would like a nomination of,
Maura, would you like to volunteer to be vice chair?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
But then we
Anne Marie makes me do
but then we lose you as secretary. So that means someone else has to be secretary, which is the job that I would not enjoy. Would anybody like to volunteer to be secretary?
I don't mind volunteering to take notes if someone will be the backup and review everything as official secretary, because I'm going to take my laptop no matter what.
Okay. That sounds like a good deal. So does anybody want to be official secretary using Maura's notes? Or we're going to have to appoint one? Okay.
Jack, I'll do a good job.
All right, so Jack McAdam has volunteered to be secretary. Thank you, Jack. Establishing rules of procedure, remote meeting policy. Is that something I'm supposed to read?
So I would recommend that you simply adopt, the city council has a remote meeting policy, and that's what we're operating under here today. The remote meeting policy provides for, the hybrid meeting format as we're operating under today, whereby members of the public can either attend in person or they can Zoom in. Pursuant to that format, you'll see the public who are coming into it electronically on the large screen formats that we have here. You'll be able to speak and interact with them as well. The meetings are also being broadcast on YouTube, town hall streams, and Zoom, and they're being recorded and preserved on our town hall streams network.
Do we have any objection to using that as policy? Okay.
It makes it easy if some of us can't get out of work to come here. We can Zoom in.
Yeah, I like this is different since the last time I was in here, so I like this.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll adopt that remote meeting policy. Public attendance and participation. It's on the agenda, but I'm not sure what is that all covered in what we just talked about?
I think how we're going to do public participation here, we need to discuss.
Okay.
We'd emailed a little bit about it, but maybe redoing that publicly here would be a good idea.
Okay. Should we discuss that now, or should we? What I think I'd like to do is to go to the next agenda item, which is the overview of the charter review process by the city manager, and then come back to that item if that's okay. Okay.
great idea.
Thank you. Sorry, Steve.
No problem.
All right, so next on the agenda, with short notice, overview of the charter review process by the city manager, which includes scope of the charter review and a discussion of the differences between amendments and revisions.
So I gave you a printed copy. I put that, it's in your packets there today. I'm going to refer to this short memo that I have. So the city charter that was effective as of January 1st, 2012 provides under section 219, quote, "At least once every 10 years, the city council shall appoint a committee to review the provisions of this charter and make recommendations to the city council on any amendments deemed necessary or appropriate. City council has so appointed the committee that you have here today. The purpose of the committee is to review the charter and make recommendations to the city council on any, quote, amendments deemed necessary or appropriate. Under that scope, recommendations of amendments, if any, of the charter to the city council. The city council will then consider those amendments in open session. If any of the amendments are supported to move forward, the city council will undergo the public process to propose the amendments for referendum consideration this November 2022, pursuant to state law Title 30A, Section 2104 and et al. So a charter is the municipal equivalent of a state or federal constitution, and it is within the municipal charter where such essential questions as structure of government, the distribution of powers within the government, and a citizen's access to government are more completely answered. The municipal charter is a primary document, a foundational expression of local control pursuant to the Home Rule authority granted to us as municipalities by the state of Maine. And that is defined in the state constitution, Article 8, Part 2nd, Section 1, where it states the inhabitants of any municipality shall have the power to alter and amend their charters on all matters not prohibited by constitution or general law, which are local and municipal in character. The legislature shall prescribe the procedure by which the municipality shall so act, and that's defined under Title 38, Chapter 111, which is Home Rule authority. So for reference, I believe there are just over 40 municipalities that have charters in the state of Maine, which is about 10%. The other of those municipalities operate pursuant to Title 30A. So if you look in Title 30A, that's municipalities and counties. It's a very, very long section of law. In there, you can go to this. You can see where county government has been set up. You can see where municipal governance has been set up. So I come from my small hometown of Corinna, operated under Title 38, did not have a charter. So they simply, by a vote at town meeting, they adopted 30A. So if you take Sanford's charter or most any charter here in the state of Maine, you can put that beside Title 30A. You see everything that's in Title 30A, what the allowances are and such and that, and you can see the direct parallel in Sanford's charter. Where the charters become more specific is in the delegated authority that's going to the representative nature that we operate under now, under representative democracy, being the city council is vested the power and authority of the legislative body. So the city council has replaced the town meeting format as far as that legislative body. And the charter is that balance between the people's access, the balance of power, and defining the delegated authority that goes to planning boards, to various other boards and commissions as it pertains to the overall governance of the city of Sanford. So under this, under the charge to the Charter Review Committee, so this is not a charter commission, this is a charter review committee, you have the purview of looking for amendments to be proposed to the council. So under Maine law sets out specific procedures for revising or amending a municipal charter. Basically, a charter revision is a fundamental change in the form of government as established by the charter and may only be made by a charter commission. Therefore, this committee can go to the extent of amendments, and they have to pause at that. I would simply encourage you that as we're going through the charter and you're reviewing all elements, I wouldn't worry necessarily up front about amendments versus a revision, because I'll take any and all of that back to our legal counsel and ask for that clarification as to if any of these are getting into the level of revision.
Who knows, at the end of this, we might actually say things like, we might need more of a charter group to look at it more formally, but I think we can do it all with revisions.
With amendments?
With amendments.
Yes. I would
do that back and forth.
I would concur. So I asked some upfront questions of Phil Saucier, the city's legal counsel, on these matters. I was talking with him yesterday, for example, on budget committee format, membership, and such under that. And I even went to the extent of, would it be an amendment or a revision if you recommended that the Board of Education go from 5 to 7? That's an amendment, because you're not changing the power of that board, you're only changing the number of the board. So it's those kind of things that you can delve into.
We could sit here and make the Board of Assessment Review smaller, some of the ones we have trouble filling, or like zone, I mean, I guess they're already at 5.
Board of Assessment Review is three to five. You can go as little as 3 and as many as 5,
We can never get people to sit on that.
which I
Really
think,
nice board, you never meet, so if anybody would like to do this after this process is complete, let me know.
but I think that was a very
The zoning board
wise,
has been the same way.
That's it, oh, that's.
a very wise piece that's in your current charter. You can let it go down to 3, and it's still a quorum, and they can operate, or it can go to 5.
That would be an interesting, I guess, with Jack here and with Paul here, we could have that discussion.
So Steve, if I'm, if I'm interpreting what you just said, what I was sort of envisioning at the end of this process is that we will have gone through, picking an example, section by section, section 607.1, because it's the page I just turned to. And we're going to discuss briefly in most cases to say, here's this section of the charter. Does anybody see any possible changes that we would want to make to this section? We can have that discussion. We can propose something to you to sort of assimilate. We don't have to worry about whether it would be considered an amendment or a revision. You and legal counsel are going to figure that out. And then in the end, we'll be told, these are the possible amendments that you could propose to the city council to make decision on.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. So further, a revision may be initiated in the same way that the charter adoption is initiated. So when it comes to a revision, there would have to be the establishment of a charter commission. And there's a formal state law process for that. As far as an amendment is merely a change or correction in detail. So the Charter Review Committee may propose amendments. The amendment procedure, the charter amendments may be initiated by order of municipal officers, so the council can do this on their own. The charter has put forward this process each 10 years, a minimum of each 10 years, so that's why this process was called out and established for this committee to initiate that process. Or it can be done by citizens petition, and that's spelled out in state law, and I've referenced that here. What I would note, the difficulty here in Maine is when I do the research on a stringent definition of what a charter revision is, it's not there. So in talking with Phil Saucy, our attorney, just yesterday, he said there has been a recent, and I didn't bring that reference, but there has been a recent Maine law case that ruled not differently from other states that had previously had ruled on an amendment versus a revision, that Maine's interpretation and prior treatment of what a revision is consistent with what other courts have found in other states. Okay, so, and I've made some references in here. When I was reading through the charter yet again and making notes in the sidebars here, one of the things that I observed was from reading through the minutes from the last Charter Commission, I noted that there was an obvious continuation of a historical and evolutionary process of Sanford's governance from the prior town meeting democracy to a representative democracy as a city form of government that we operate under today. There was a lot of discussion about the effectiveness of the governance of the city. There was a lot of discussions on the checks and balances as well as the delegated authorities created within the charter. The people's continued ability to address change in any area if it becomes problematic, and that's in the latter sections of the charter. And the stability in the form and delivery of governance and fiscal matters. So that's a brief overview of what the scope is for the committee. And I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Steve. Next on our agenda is set the review process and time frame. First on that is public hearing, then advertising, then recommendations to city council. So I understand it as it relates to time frame is our job has to be done by July, which if we're still here in July, that's going to be surprising to me. But that's the maximum time frame that we're talking about, right?
So you'd need to finish your work by the 1st of July. That would give the city council the requisite amount of time they need to advertise a public hearing, to review your recommendations as far as charter amendments, get that through the public process, And then for all of those amendments that the council supports to go forward for the November referendum, I have to set up, yet again, a public hearing process to go over each of those amendments in their entirety, and then have those ready by the end of August for our city clerk to send to the publishers, so we have that in time for the November election.
None of that process we're involved in. We're handing this off to city council.
You are. Well, I would ask that you participate in the public hearings in support of the committee's work,
Understood.
or
answer
if they're asking for
questions.
further clarification. Yeah.
Do they vote on the whole package or each individual?
That's a good question.
It's each
Amendment.
individual amendment.
Okay.
And that has to be proposed at the election, each individual amendment. So I can remember 20 years ago, I stepped into the city of Caribou, had 35 proposed charter amendments, for which one was highly contentious, and the citizens group stood in that council chambers and pointed fingers and said, if this one goes through, we will defeat all others. That one was removed and all others passed, so.
But, I mean, I think if we're talking about, we want to put some definitions in, that's one section, or does it have to be, each definition have to be separate? We talked about definitions before everybody was here.
Yeah, and when I've gone through this, there's a lot, I was looking for the ambiguity that I've run into in some of the definitions and such, and that's a huge thing. Boy.
That'll be a question for the attorney, obviously.
Yeah, I'm going to ask that more, because, order, resolution, and ordinance is used interchangeably throughout the document, and it's just, I can't imagine that we've got to show the lines and strikes in every particular section, but if you can address that by definition, I think we can get there.
So I'm thinking, based on what you said prior, though, that becomes a you and council issue. A lawyer council issue. We're going to have the discussions of the potential changes that we want to make by section. We're going to propose those changes to you, to council. My question is then, after that and after it's interpreted, does it then come back to us to say, yes, does this meet the general consensus of what you all agreed upon?
I would like that process. So I think if you move timely, I can easily get that back to you for your full review before that's submitted over to the city council.
Because I think that'd be important if we're going to support this for a public hearing later. It would be important that it come back to us prior to that.
Know where everything's going.
Okay, good
And
enough.
some of these details that we're talking about, I would refer to it as the Star Trek management format. You tell me what you want and then say, make it so.
Awesome.
But that has to, I mean, this back and forth process has to occur in that process through to July. So, we might end up having that nice break while we're waiting for our attorney to come back.
Ongoing dialogue between us and council.
Lawyer.
Lawyer.
Yeah, my intent is, so if you had a series that you already struck on today, I'll review those, timely.
Okay.
So I can come back to you for your next meeting and have that review done, not wait till the end.
Okay, that'll help us with our setting the timeline too, I think, as part of the agenda. All right, so, timeframe, is this where we discuss meeting frequency, et cetera? Okay, so I'd kind of like this to be an open thing. I'll start. I had written this out ahead of time. In general, I prefer to move faster than slower because I'll forget everything in between meetings if we wait like a month in between meetings, whether that be weekly or bi-weekly. It'd be preference for me if we just set a certain, I don't know if we do this by doodle or how we do it, but if we decided on a certain day of the week, either a certain fixed time and day for the duration of this process that we're going to commit to being here, whether that be once a week or every other week. But if somebody else has another idea, I'm open to that. Okay, that's good. Make sure you use your mic too. That's okay. Does that work for you, Joan? You like that idea? Any objections to that?
Likewise.
Okay,
Yeah, I don't have any objection to it. I just have several
Ability.
weeks between now and the end date that I'm not here. So I could either Zoom in, if I can do that, wherever I am.
yep,
Some of my trips will be easier than others to do that on, but as long as I don't need to be here for every meeting, I think that's fine. I completely agree that if you do every other week on Monday at 10 o'clock or whatever you're going to do, that makes it easier for everyone,
okay,
including the public.
all right. Jack, same for you? You're already in your calendar?
Yeah, I think today works pretty good.
Busy season for you?
10 o'clock, I mean, I'm pretty much, don't have anything on schedule until we start mowing lawns and stuff.
So my only question to that would be, so if we're gonna meet, say we're gonna meet every other week, just, should we make it 2 hours so we can get a ton done every other week? Because it is tight, it's a fairly tight timeframe.
I wanted to make today an hour because I thought we really only had an hour of work to do, but 2 hours to me would make sense. I'd rather get more work done at one meeting, but I also don't want to do the whole, like, let's leave a bunch of open time so the task expands itself to the time we set aside.
When we're done,
We
we're
would just,
done, we leave.
yeah.
More than 2 hours is pushing.
We'll get tired and we'll end up wasting time anyway. But can
Mr.
we?
Chair?
So I'll just throw this out there. So today is Wednesday, 10 a.m. Would that work for people on an every other week basis for 2 hours?
Can I just interrupt for a second and
Oops.
say Counselor Stackpole has his hand up on Zoom?
Where is he? Oh,
Yeah, here I am.
sorry, Counselor Stackpole.
Yeah, a little late to the show, had some technology mix-up here. I missed the comment. It seems like we're surrounding Wednesday at 10 o'clock, which is okay with me. But I put my hand up because I didn't hear what the original discussion was about. The mic wasn't on, so I wasn't sure what you were talking about. But something like Wednesday at 10 o'clock is okay with me. And if you want to do every other week at 2 hours or hour and a half, that's fine also. So I'll leave it at that. And you can continue the discussion. I've been following you on YouTube, and now I've been able to get into the meeting. So I'm all set.
Okay. Thanks, Counselor. Paul, or not Paul.
Okay, I've
Yep,
been called
David.
worse.
Paul, David.
I didn't say that. If we do Wednesdays, if we could back it up half an hour, that would be much better for me. So 9:30 to
9:30?
11:30.
I'd start with a preference of other than Wednesdays or Wednesday afternoons would
Oh,
be
Wednesday
better.
doesn't work well for you?
Wednesday's a staff meeting, generally. But
Okay.
I could
Well,
quit
I
my
can-
job, which would be great too. but-
I am fortunate to be self-employed, so I can make the rest of my life work around this temporarily if I need to.
If we can make it the first and third weeks of the months, that should avoid all of my other meetings.
Afternoon's good for me too on Wednesdays.
Yeah.
So if they don't care what week of the month, I'm just like, the second week of the month, we have tons of subcommittees on Tuesdays, Wednesdays.
Okay. I can do Monday.
Mondays? What about you, Dave?
After 10,
At 10?
after, my staff meetings at 9 Monday mornings. Usually it's done by 10. So,
So 10:15?
yep.
10:15 to 12:15 on Mondays? Counselor Stackpole?
Yeah, one more time, 10:15 to what on Monday?
10:15 to 12:15 at a maximum on Mondays.
Monday, yeah, that's
The first
fine with me.
and, the first and third.
No, that doesn't matter on Monday.
Oh, it doesn't matter on Monday?
Never.
Okay. All right.
So is it every other Monday or?
Every other Monday, I think we've generally agreed to. Every week might be
Okay.
too much.
All right, okay, 10:15 for 2 hours on Monday. Yeah, that's fine.
That's what I was just going to mention, the Monday holidays, so we just got to get creative, make sure we're not
Hitting those, yeah.
losing meetings on
Okay,
holidays.
so can I propose that generally following an every other week, Monday at 10:15 to 12:15 schedule, that we can follow up this meeting with an actual schedule all the way out through, say, the end of May? So we'll account for Memorial Day in there, or whatever other Monday holidays we could have, and Patriots Day. I know I'm going to be gone the week of April vacation, so we'll work around that. And then, so we'll send something out.
April vacation is Patriots Day this year.
Yes.
That's perfect.
We'll set something out, and if people have issues with it, we can make adjustments to it, and then we'll have a final schedule that you can put in your calendars.
But we'll start with the first and third Monday, right?
We don't need to, we don't necessarily
need.
need to start with the first and third, Morissette,
No,
so
because it's Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. I have
the
time.
question then becomes, do we want to go ahead and meet next Monday or the following Monday? What? So I propose
I
we
would
meet
s-
next Monday.
Yep.
All right,
Sets it on a good trajectory.
All right.
Do next Monday.
there we go.
I'll be Zooming.
That's fine. I think that's fine.
Yeah.
Did you get that, Counselor Stackpole?
Yep, all set.
Next Monday, 10:15, all right.
Yep. Thank you.
Public hearing was part of this. So I wanted to ask about public hearing. So my understanding of public, I think there's some general agreement that we want to have public hearing or that we need to have public hearing early in this process, right, at the very beginning?
Steve, I think he's
Steve,
asking you that.
yeah, I'm asking you.
I'm just taking notes here.
That's okay. While you're taking notes. So my public hearing for me is always kind of difficult in a way because it's the public comes in, they say what they want to say, we do or don't respond. Typically, it's a one-way conversation, right? At the same time, we want to get feedback from the community. So, you know, public hearing, very few people, very few members of the public generally come to speak at public hearing, but for those who want to, I think it's important to have the ability to. I always sort of, when I see public hearing just at the beginning of a process, I kind of cringe because the public doesn't know enough about what they're commenting on to really comment, and I think it should be allowed throughout the process. And so is there a way that we can make public hearing part of every meeting?
I would ask you to consider this, that you might want to start with public comment at the start of each meeting, so, you know, members of the public can either Zoom in or be here and say, I would like to see this, that, or the other. You take that in under advisement and work through that. If you go to a public hearing, right, that's the expectation that there's a two-way dialogue that could take place. Doesn't have to, but it could take place.
So that was part of my question is what's the definition difference between public comment and public hearing? So public comment is one-way comment, we don't communicate back. Public hearing, there is meant to be a discussion at that time
Right.
with a
So
response back.
I would think you would take public comment as you're starting into this process, and when you get closer to the end, or at the end, have a public hearing with the committee between you and the public
Okay,
to engage in their comment on the 5 or 30 things that you have listed out here.
okay.
Let's see, public hearing being a little more formal.
Make sure you use your mic.
Yep, it's on.
Okay.
Public hearing being a little more formal, and public comment being kind of more of a participatory role here in our group. So I agree with Steve in the sense that having a public comment section with some limitations. All of those things can tend to override the work of the committee and eat into your 2-hour timeframe.
Yep.
But I do feel it's critical. I mean, that's a critical component here.
So are we all, are we all okay as a group as having a standing agenda item at the beginning of every meeting to be public comment?
Yeah, I think people can submit comments via email
That too.
as well, which might be a little more efficient way, and it gets it in writing.
That gets me to the next part of that agenda, which I don't know if that's part of now or I think it is, well, we already went into set meeting schedule, so we skipped that part. And we talked about recommendations to city council. So in this 22-17301, do we have any more comment on either public hearing? I don't know what advertising would be the advertising of public hearing? Is that what that's referring to, Steve? Okay.
Right, if we have a public hearing, we'll advertise that on behalf of the committee.
Okay. But the public hearing, as we just discussed, is probably going to be towards the end, so we don't have to deal with that really yet. Okay.
Yeah, I'm going to guess you're going to have two types of public comments. You're going to have people that comment on what we're doing and have comments about what they've heard at our meetings and what we've discussed. Then I think you may have people that just want to come in and be heard about how they think Sanford ought to be doing things, and regardless of what we do. So I would think that the latter would be more of a public hearing sort of a comment, where the public comment would, be in reference to what we're dealing with. And I don't know if that's helpful or not.
Yeah, no, it is. And I think we'll need to be careful that we're defining what we're doing here, because I would say that second part of what you said is something that they should do at council.
I agree.
We're a pretty narrowly defined little group here with a specific mission, and so if people were to come in here to start talking about trash bags, let's say, we'd say, that's not our area, here's the next city council meeting.
Yeah, and that fully supports what Steve was saying, do that towards the end.
Yep.
Those comments can go on to city council, they can deal with that.
Yep.
That's one of the things, is we might come up to a section where people have a very heated opinion, and do we want them to make sure that they're commenting at the beginning of the meeting, or when we get to that topic, are we gonna allow people, after we've all discussed, are we gonna allow them to just make a comment at that time, since it's of the moment, and they happen to be here for the item? Sometimes it works out well if you allow them to comment when there's an item like that.
I just, there are not people calling every day, wanting changes to the charter.
Right.
But for the very minor amount of times in the last 10 years that any charter amendment has been proposed, it energizes conversation, because change, right? Because just the simple change from 14 to 10 days for advertisement for public hearings in a couple of areas, wow, right? Because an interpretation, well, they're only doing this because, right? Once that was explained, then it passed, but.
And all it was about was, by the time you finish a council meeting, you're beyond that 14 days, so you have to wait 2 council meetings to do what you need to do, whereas if you had 10 days, you can get it done 2 weeks later. It was the simplest reason.
So in general, I'm
Mr. Chair?
Yes, sorry, Councilor Stockwell.
I just want to put my 2 cents worth in, yeah. I see Dave looking around. Where is he? I think that we should do everything that we're talking about. I think in this age of Zoom meetings, I think you'll find that you'll have more public comment than I think what we did in the past. So that people can zoom in public and speak to the meeting. You've also, I think, if you have an opportunity for comments from the public at the beginning of the meeting, let's say what we do with the council or what we did with the school board, which was to say for public comment for items that are not on the agenda. And then that gives people an opportunity to just speak in general about the charter, which I don't really think there's going to be a lot of general comments, but then also allow them, if they're taking the time to either zoom in or attend the meeting, to speak to a particular item. And of course, as chair, you can apply time limits or any kind of management limits that you feel that you need to do, which actually would be unlikely. But I think we should do all of the things that we're talking about, as well as email and things like that. So,
Thank you. So, and one of you two had talked about email as being a possible way of being able to communicate as well. So part of, for me speaking, I think the public comment and public input into this, or having the public feel like they have input into this, is pretty important. None of us know anything more about the charter, I don't think, than a lot of the members of the public, and we're going to learn a little bit as we go here, and we've probably already learned in our kind of cursory initial review. There are a few agenda items in here that I think if we really get into could be contentious with the public, depending on what road we go down. So not contentious, but generate a response. So how feasible, aside from public comment and public hearing, what other ways do we want to allow the public to communicate with us as well as us communicate with the public? So email is obviously one way. So we can broadcast our, kind of like City Council has a button on the website or whatever to be able to send an email. Is there a way for that we can communicate a way for the citizens to send an email directly to the entire charter committee?
What's the general?
Or to submit, all of our email addresses and copy paste something, or how can we broadcast that?
So currently, if people want to submit comments to the city council or to the city manager, they do it through the website, and that comes to me, and then I disseminate that to the council and the city manager. Is it possible to set up a new button on the website just for this process? Ben is telling me yes. So we could set up a specific form for people to submit comments for this specific committee if we wanted.
Does the committee think that that would be a good idea?
I think that's an excellent idea, is to having a central location. That was one of my thoughts, was a central point and then letting that office disseminate it to us.
So if we receive feedback from the community, either verbally or by a personal email or whatever it is, we can point people to, we can copy that link or whatever it is and point people to that site to submit an email that would be for public record.
So you do have to be a little careful in that. I don't have to be careful because my email is already subject to Freedom of Access Act requests. But as soon as you involve personal emails, your personal email account becomes subject to Freedom of Access Act. So that's, I'm not saying that's a roadblock, but everyone needs to be aware of that.
And that's why I wanted this, so that if somebody does send me a personal email, I can be like, I can't comment here. You can submit that question here, and we go.
And the importance is when we all get the information from the person, the written communication, don't engage in a conversation via email.
Yes.
That's the critical piece. Get the information. We can discuss that information when we're all together, and if there's the need to have a response, it would be a centralized response, that we all agree to. It's important not to have that dialogue, because then you do start that freedom of information, potentially getting into the weeds, and you do feel a little bit personally attacked, because you're like, well, I don't want them looking at my personal emails. I don't. What if I chatted with them about the farmer's market or something? It's all of a sudden like, because Jack and I will have different communications, and all of a sudden it opens up those communications for whatever reason. So anyway.
Yeah,
So
Mr.
we
Chair.
None of us
we
want to
can
be in the
Store
weeds.
that information so the public can see all of your work, and the information is be stored in one location on the website, so that central depository will be there.
Yeah, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Councilor.
Is it possible for the city to just issue everybody on the Charter Commission a city email like councilors get and so on, just temporarily, just give everybody a city email? Then you don't have to involve personal emails, and that would, I agree. What Moore's saying is critical, that we don't engage in back and forth, really regardless of what email we're using, but that would protect people's personal emails if we were able to just issue them a city email, sanford.org type email for the duration of the committee here.
That would not prevent whatever device you received, even that city email on, becomes searchable. Not just the city email address, but anything on that device.
Yeah, none of us want that.
No.
Right. So I would just avoid that completely. We can keep the central depository there on the city's website and simply disseminate informational packets to you.
How do the packets get, so how would do we get that in real time, or do we just get the packet at the next meeting?
No, we can push that out ahead of time. So we use a product called Granicus. We'll keep all of the work information in there, and that will produce a searchable bookmarked PDF.
But then how do you get us the PDF? Do we go?
We'll send you the PDF.
But that doesn't violate our device now that we're receiving?
Well, but we're only sending you the exact same information that's on the city's website.
Is what's already there, okay.
So, yeah.
Good enough, as long as it meets whatever requirement. On this note, instead of, or in addition to formal feedback received that way, how viable is it for us to, there's the City of Sanford Facebook page, there's various other Facebook pages that the city would have. How viable would it be to set up a Charter Commission Facebook page where people could submit informal feedback? And,
Well,
I could monitor that.
Let me check on that. So we have a
Commenting
communications.
turned off.
No, not necessarily. I don't want that. I want commenting turned on. We wouldn't necessarily respond to the comments, but people could feel heard. We could then monitor that page, aggregate the information, and say, look, these are the things that the citizens are concerned with, and then we could have those conversations based on that. So there could be some rules in terms of we're not responding to anything on that page, unless it's I don't know if we can make exceptions like clarification items or things that are egregiously wrong or whatever, but we wouldn't engage in back and forth, but it would allow another method for people to communicate with us. Is that viable?
So I can talk with our communications coordinator on that. We can also use that position to disseminate the information that this process has started and it's ongoing, and she can push a press release over to Zendel at Sanford Springvale News. She can put it out on the city's Facebook page. That will immediately get shared on The Happening. Yeah, I'm not on there, so I don't know, but the interesting
You
thing
should be. You would enjoy it.
No. No.
Do you have a hammer for my thumb?
But Jordan, our communications coordinator, she started the Citizens Communications Survey. So the first 250 responses that came through, there's a certain age demographic that's still that Facebook user. Younger than, no. Older than, no. But the 30 to 65, they're the Facebook crowd, right? You could see it in the survey. The only disappointing part that I've seen in there so far is in that demographic, when you look at one of the primary sources of information about the city, it's that website, The Happening.
That's a primary source of the information, right?
Yeah. So we're going to take back the hill with fair and accurate information, but so working on it. But.
Well, so from our perspective, I wouldn't anticipate that there will be a lot of participation in, who's going to want to, you'd have to like the page, you'd see the information if you like the page, all that stuff. A lot of people are going to be like, I don't want to be bombarded with Charter Commission information. I don't even know what the Charter Commission is. But at the same time, people will have been given the opportunity to do so. They will know that the process is transparent. They will know that they have the ability to be able to communicate if they choose to receive information that way. And then for the people that have a problem at the end to say, nobody communicated with me, it's an easy thing to be like, look, we tried. We put it here. It was shared on The Happening, which is 24,000 people, not all of which are residents, but it was out there, and that we tried to engage with the community, and I think that's important. So,
Well, and this gives us yet another tool. So the day she launched the communications survey, within 2 days, we picked up 200 additional likes on the Facebook
on the
page.
City of Sanford page.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm going to leave that with you to then communicate with us on how we can do that. Okay.
Right.
Thank you. Question, go ahead.
Just a question in regard to, I haven't heard any discussion relative to communications that we have amongst ourselves and the fear, I mean, the understanding I have that we shouldn't be communicating back and forth without having that be a party to everybody in the group, just to make sure that those kinds of things are disclosed and aware. I guess I'd let you fill us in, Steve.
I just would not.
Just would not.
I just would not, period. Then you didn't have to worry about it.
I
mean,
knew
if
we
you're
had the
meeting-
doodle poll for when to have a meeting. I have no problem with that kind of thing, but going much beyond that and getting into content certainly is something I would want to see in a public setting.
But any debate, right, if you debate that by email, that's part of FOIA, that's searchable records, so just don't. If you're meeting biweekly, do all of your work here, do all of your conference with each other, develop your work product here, and cut it at that.
Well, I think what that requires then is, I mean, I'm familiar with some of this on prior experience with Budget Committee, so I think, and many of you have been on other committees in the past, so I think what it requires is us to be really clear what our agendas are and to be as productive as we can in the meetings, to cover as much ground as we can, and to make clear what's expected of each member at that meeting for the next meeting, I think, right?
Right, so if at the end of each meeting, you're setting the agenda for the next meeting, the items that you want to cover.
Right.
Or the areas that you want to cover.
As specifically as possible. Okay. Let me go back to the agenda. Set the meeting schedule we've already done. We have on the agenda comments on the initial impressions. We have 10 minutes left in the meeting. Would it be okay? Well, first off, does anybody have any comments that they really wish to make today? What I was going to say is I'd like to potentially push that for a second and sort of give what I see as sort of a vision for how our agenda could be for the next 2 months. Or do you want to make comments first? I was just really unclear with that.
I'd rather go through each section. Start each section rather than commenting on
On the whole thing first.
the whole thing first. I mean, I've picked out a few spots that are kind of in the middle, and I think we need to go
Section by section.
section by section.
So in your mind, our next meeting could be something like, let's cover section, the 100s or whatever.
Yeah.
Ones and twos.
Or whatever it is, ones and twos. So speaking generally, I think I do.
1, 2, 3 is pretty easy.
Yeah, so it would kind of go like, does anybody have any comments on sections in sections 1, 2, and 3, let's say, if we wanted to use 1, 2, and 3. So we could put that as an agenda item for next meeting to say, we should be prepared to talk about items specifically in that in those sections. I think we'd start out not going number by number. It would be sort of a broad impression of which ones might we have any kind of critical mass around that we've all commented on, and then leave it to the end to go back through one by one. Because I think at the end, we probably will have to go one by one, right? We'll have to go section 100.1.1. I don't know if we have to read the whole thing, but do we have any comments on this? We'll say no, then at the end, we'll go through the whole thing, right? Or is that up to us?
I would just start right down through the document.
Okay.
Yeah.
Article 1, Section 1, any comment,
And
right?
it's almost better to.
And you would do that at the beginning?
I would.
Okay, so instead of just kind of like,
Yeah.
okay,
And I would actually overbook ourselves, say, okay, let's do sections 1 through this, because if we don't get to the last one, we just put it on the top of the agenda for the next meeting. But if we get to it, we haven't hog-tied ourselves, and that we can't talk about it because we didn't put it on the agenda.
okay.
So I would actually overbook ourselves a little, and if we
I
get to it,
don't even know if you want to
great.
limit it. Here's where we're starting.
Yeah.
We're going to go as far as we can get, because you're going to have items that we just go through like nothing.
Right.
I know.
I wouldn't want to get to 10:30 and say, oh, that's the agenda. See you.
Well, we can,
Agree.
as a general, I think as an agenda item, we can say sections 100 through 300 or whatever they are. Obviously, if we can keep moving if we have time left. But just to kind of, so you're not feeling like you have to review the whole thing.
1 to 5 are going to have quite a bit of similarity too. It's, you're talking about appointing boards, you're talking about general makeup of boards. I mean, education and city council have a lot of similarity. Mayor's position is pretty much, their terms are different, and, they lead the meetings, and they have some additional, but it's not much different than, and the only thing that's different about a mayor from the head of the city council was that they're elected separately. So it's like, there's not a lot there. So,
There's some
Get through quite a bit.
strikeouts, because you had the language to get you into the new cycles for elections for councilors and.
right, so we can strike all that
mayor.
out, clean
There's
it
some
up.
strikeouts there.
Clean up.
Yeah.
I remember that was practically half a meeting discussing the term of the mayor.
I know that, yeah, and I know that in my own notes, I've already gone through and have my agenda items, and just through 1 through 3 was really short for me. There's very little there.
I think,
4 was also short, 5 was also short, 6 was a lot, but that's probably
but you
why I'm
can do 1
here.
through 5, skip over the budget,
Yeah,
and continue with something else, because we know the budget's going to be a hefty discussion,
okay.
the whole process of it.
So let's say, so I'm going to amend that. Let's say sections 1 through 5 is what we should be prepared to talk about next week. Do we need, so what I was going to say as part of the process is, so we've talked about how to have the public involved, and I feel pretty comfortable with that. Do we need to solicit feedback from other constituents? Like specifically, like, do we need to have a time for city council to be heard on changes that they'd like to be seen? Or the city manager's office? Do we want to get your feedback? Do we want to get staff's feedback? Do we want to get the school department's feedback? On anything that is, and I guess I'm looking for anything that they have seen as an obstacle to do what they need to do. So if the council is like, oh, we'd really like to do this, but the charter prohibits us from doing this, I'd like to hear that. And that could be just part of public comment, but do we need to have a separate, say, okay, on May 13th, this is the time that we'd like to invite a representative from the council to come talk about whatever concerns that they may have with the charter?
So there's 2 ways you go about it. Bob and I can ask our fellow counselors, or ask them to come to the meeting, or we can ask them. School committee, I think we should definitely make them aware, but we should be very specific. This time, we're discussing the makeup of your board. So if there's any comments, any like changes you'd like to see to the makeup section of your board, let us know. But I think the budget section, I suspect they would want to have significant input into, if I were to say.
And as far as the Board of Education, so City of Portland has a charter commission going right now. So they invited me, and I went in and spoke about, they had read through Sanford's charter. They liked the language that they saw, and they wanted a better understanding of the working relationship between the city council in the charter and the Board of Education, because they saw that
We got along?
they got along, right? We get along. So one of the things I said to them was
Tried it.
perhaps the most important elements is not as much what's already in there, but what could be added that would further express or solidify that positive working relationship between the two entities. So I don't have anything specific in my mind right now, but it was apparent talking with them through that process that, wow, they've got some issues over there, right? It's just, they don't get along. So there's that huge power struggle. So one of the things I've enjoyed is the manager
That's always
here.
personality, not charter, though. That's the hard part.
Well, but I truly enjoy the working relationship that the city has with the school department. It's just not broke, right? It's a good process. So I would just say, anything that we can do to strengthen that relationship.
It wasn't always that way.
Well,
Say, Paul.
yeah.
If anything, I think fixing the warrant committee process and the way the budget was looked at by the warrant committee, which was literally, they broke into subcommittees, tore apart every department. So your departments, it wouldn't have been you they'd listen to. It would be like every single department they'd tear apart. So your employees were kind of ripped to shreds. Same on the school side. And then there was no trust amongst the warrant committee, so it happened all over again at the larger group. I mean, does everybody remember this? And fixing that budget process and making it clear who you were hearing about the budget from, that did a lot of good towards healing a lot of that and making sure that you can't tear apart staff. You have to ask your questions through the central figure who is in charge of that department or that half of the city. It was important. It was a lot of change.
So I see that evolution through your charters. I would just sit here and suggest that the budget thing isn't quite fixed yet.
No, we
There's
knew
further
that
evolution there, but
we knew it wasn't fixed, but it was a compromise. But
Yeah.
charters, in many respects, are a compromise.
no, I recognize that. You can see that process to get from here to here to here to here.
Bob and I were two of the people who knew that at our community size, we needed to get away from this, not only the town meeting, but we needed to get away from the budget committee the way it was. But it's made progress years over year. I mean, anybody who's been here long enough knows that, so.
Just a quick comment. I mean, under the we'll say the previous system of government that we had, in my opinion, there were just too many cooks. And you can look at that however you want to. And we streamlined, that was the exact wording that we used. We tried to streamline government processes in the previous charter. We all get along, and I think it's great that we get along because the city, the two divisions, school and city or municipality, are not pitted against each other. And I think that goes to personality, that goes to what Steve is talking about, personal relationships and professional relationships. And I think specifically not going there. The school doesn't go there and blame the municipality for lack of money that they're receiving and vice versa. And that was essentially the war, if you will, that we used to be into. And I don't want to rehash all that old stuff. So I know we have to look at it, but it's been 10 years, and this particular aspect has been working okay. And I'm not saying we can't improve it, but it's come a long way from the internal battles that we used to have around budget. And Lance has been on budget committees. I've been on budget committees. Moore's been on budget committees. I'm not sure who else here has been on budget committees. But it is very streamlined. We do, I think, here the budget committee listens to the school's needs as well as listening to the municipality's needs, and we tend to balance that. And I think as long as we have balance, then this will proceed okay. That does come down to personalities. You can have a city council member that in the future that doesn't like the schools and wants to constantly come in and try to take money out of the school budget or specific programs or whatever. That's obvious. And then you would venture into, on a smaller scale, what we had in the past. And fortunately, both on the council side and the board side, and a good relationship between the city manager and the superintendent, we've been able to avoid that. But a lot of that is just politics. But I think the system is working, and so. But I'm certainly open to any discussion on how we can improve it.
Thanks, Bob. Yeah, we'll get into the budget part of it. I think that's going to probably be one of the more lengthy things that we end up talking about out of this. But out of respect for people's time, we're up against the 1 hour time frame. My question was simply whether we, as a committee, felt like we needed to engage specifically with and have a meeting time set aside to hear from city council, to hear from school committee, to hear from the city manager's office, or whether that can be done more informally through regular public comment or sending an email to the box for us to review or things like that.
I think you need to set aside some specific portions of our meeting for that input. From a perspective of the next agenda, if we were looking at sections 1 through 5.
Yep.
As being your starting point, and maybe establishing some of those parameters for input from other agencies or other organizations within the charter.
I think that's exactly right. So if we can go, does anybody else want to comment on that? Sorry, before I.
My only comment would be from certain departments, it might be helpful to get comments in writing if they wish to do that. So we can look them over, look the sections over, and when they're here to discuss it, we can have maybe a better discussion, more efficient discussion than we might otherwise have.
I think, so we can note that for the minutes, and I think we can have that discussion at our next meeting. We can have the discussion of how do we communicate with them in writing and how do we set aside certain dates to have whoever the constituents are that we want to hear from. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay,
Yep.
excellent. Anyone else want to comment on that specifically? Anyone else have an
So you
agenda?
want to make an agenda item to discuss how we're going to communicate with,
I'd like to make an agenda item to discuss, the method of communication that we have with not only the public, which we covered today, but with city manager, school department, city council, and any other entities that I'm not thinking of off the top of my head. So, I could picture it being an email and in an invitation to a
Do
meeting.
they all know we're going through this process now?
I don't know, does Matt Nelson know we're going through this process? He does, right?
I spoke with Matt, geez, it was today, Wednesday?
Okay.
Must have been
So,
yesterday.
Seems like if we're going to talk about the budget, those people who are interested should tune into that meeting or show up.
We won't be on the budget yet next week, I don't
Oh,
believe.
I know. It's just like,
A little forewarning.
we're going 1 through 5, and anyone has any issues with that, they ought to tune in or send in a comment.
Yeah, I agree, because the earlier the better. When we did the first charter committee from a long time ago in 2002, at the very end of our process, we handed it to the school department. They had their attorney review the whole thing. I mean, this is bigger. This is a complete revision and rewrite. But they looked through the whole thing, and it came back, and we had a lot of adjustments to make. It was great for that type of process, but I would want to know very upfront while we're working on the section rather than having to go back.
So the way I could picture this being, if we agree as a committee that we want to review, and I'm sorry that we're late, if we want to review sections 100 through 500 next week, we set as the agenda items how we want to communicate with those committees, and then potentially, based on that conversation, we invite, say, like if sections 3 was to do with the school committee, whichever it is, you know what the numbers are. For whatever sections they are, then we invite them at the next meeting to come in and comment on the things that we covered, and then the next meeting, review.
I would almost expect a little bit of a lead notice from the manager's office that basically allows for those folks to know what's coming.
Yep.
You know, there is a charter review committee right now, and they're going to be soliciting your input in the next 2 months. You know, just if you could start thinking.
Yeah, they could start working on it now.
Right.
Can we get an email out to, say, city council, school committee? I mean,
Planning board, et cetera, that kind of thing.
So I'm looking at the flow here. So Articles 1, 2, 3, and 4, those are confined within the municipal side. Articles 5, and I'm going to put 6 in there, the budget. So Article 5 is the Department of Education, and Article 6 is the budget. I think that starts to get us down the road where I would want substantial input from superintendent and the Board of Education. So I know, for example, the discussion is the Board of Education being 5 versus 7, the merits of 5 versus 7 of the Board of Education. And it's always been a contention, not a contention, it's been a concern of the school board that, like, for example, on the Budget Committee, there was no call out for specific representation to, from the Board of Education side on the Budget Committee. I think they've been well represented for the years that I've been here and such, but I think Articles 5 and 6 really get into that first time that you really get into the relationship between the city and the Board of Education. So maybe that could be for a second meeting. I could put that out to Matt Nelson to talk with the Board of Education and they could build up towards their review on those two items.
so next meeting, sections 1 through 4. The next meeting, the opportunity for Mr. Nelson to come in.
And discuss the school concerns with all those sections, maybe.
Then the following meeting to be for us to discuss that meeting.
Yes.
Something like that. Okay, so that gets us through our next three, kind of a rough idea of what our next 3 meetings would look like as an agenda.
Because when I look at Article 5, the Board of Education, and it's through the entire charter, Portland, that's why Portland asked to have that discussion was, gee, you've got adamant separation in here between, the council and the Board of Education. Yep. So they weren't believing of that, right?
What did they say? We have what?
We have full separation. I mean, everywhere in here, for the power that's vested to, like, in my position of the council, it goes to the municipal side, it stops, right? I can't make any decision or process legally towards the school department and such.
And their city manager can?
Well, their council can, right? They don't have that separation that we have.
All right,
That was a concept for them.
Sorry.
we're late on time. Does anybody have any other agenda items to add to next week's meeting? And are we clear on what the agenda is? Okay.
I've got sections 1 through 4 for March 28th, sections 5 through 7 it's going to end up being April 11th. Yes, 28th? And
No,
then-
I don't think that's right. Or is that right? No, because the April 11th one would be the superintendent coming in.
Right, that's what I was about to say.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sections 5 through 7, which is the school and the budget.
Okay,
Where we'll have, and I was about to say, on April 11th was when we would have the superintendent come in and then continue the discussion of that section for the April 25th meeting, because I think that's going to take a couple sections.
yep, okay, very
And
good.
then I think we'll be well on track. If we can finish all the budget and concerns in a couple of meetings, I think we're well on track to finishing the rest of it. Wouldn't you think, Steve? Based on, I mean, it's a lot of,
I love an optimist.
well, it's a lot of nuances of language fixes and definitions after that.
Yeah, okay.
I don't know. Oh, there's actually, in the personnel system, there's a section for school personnel. Interesting. Okay.
All right. No other agenda items for next week? All right, we'll consider this meeting adjourned. Thank you.